My name is Hilda Hernandez, and I'm 27 years old. 2 weeks before the most important day of my life, my parents sat across from my fiancé, Marcus, at a dinner table that was supposed to be about seating arrangements and final guest counts, and they told him I had been hiding a secret child from him for years. I was in the kitchen when it happened. I heard the shift in the conversation but didn't catch the words clearly at first. My mother's voice dropped to that particular low tone she uses when she is delivering something she has rehearsed, something calculated. I set down the serving dish I was holding and walked slowly toward the dining room doorway, and that is when I heard my father say it clearly. She has a child, Marcus. A boy. She gave him up years ago, and she never told you because she knew you would leave. I stood frozen in the hallway. My hands went cold. My stomach dropped through the floor. I had no child. I had never had a child. There was no boy, no secret, no hidden past pregnancy, nothing. What my parents had just told the man I loved, the man I was supposed to marry in 14 days, was a complete and deliberate lie. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I couldn't see his face from where I was standing, but I could hear the silence. My mother filled it by adding, almost gently, almost as though she was performing concern, "We just thought you deserved to know before the wedding. It wouldn't be fair to you." My father leaned in and said those words that have stayed with me ever since. "She's a liar. Always has been." Just like that. Said about his own daughter. Said to the man I loved. Said with a steadiness in his voice that told me he had prepared this, thought it through, decided on it. I want to explain something before I go further, because this story doesn't make sense without the background. Marcus came from a family with money. Not overwhelming wealth, but enough, a respected family in our city. A business his father had built, a name that carried some quiet weight in local circles. My parents had never liked him, but not because of who he was as a person. They didn't like what his family represented, or more precisely, they didn't like that I was building a life that would take me away from their control. My mother had spent years positioning me as someone who needed guidance, someone fragile and unreliable who required managing. My independence threatened her version of me. And Marcus, steady, grounded, deeply loyal Marcus, made that independence real. He made it permanent. And so they had decided, in whatever conversation they must have had privately before that evening, that they would end us. What they didn't know, what neither of them had anticipated, was that Marcus had already been suspicious of them. Not of me. Of them. For months, small things had been off. Comments that didn't add up. A time my mother had called him privately to plant what she framed as a worry about my past. A message forwarded to him anonymously that he later traced back to a device connected to my parents' home network. Marcus had said nothing to me. He had instead done something very quiet, very deliberate, and very thorough. He had hired a private investigator. Not to investigate me, but to investigate the pattern of interference coming from my family. He had wanted documentation. He had wanted truth. And by the night of that dinner, he already had it. I stepped into the dining room doorway just as my parents finished their performance. My mother was looking at Marcus with that practiced expression of reluctant honesty. My father sat back with his arms crossed, satisfied. Marcus looked at them both for a moment without speaking. Then he turned his head, saw me standing in the doorway, and his expression didn't change into panic or betrayal or confusion. It was calm. It was almost sad, but not for the reason my parents were hoping for. He looked back at my parents and said, "I know." My mother's face opened with relief. My father's chin lifted slightly. You could see it, that flash of victory, the belief that it had worked, that the next words would be a confrontation turned toward me. Their eyes lit up in that half second between his words and what came next. Marcus finished his sentence. "I know that you made it up. And I have the private investigator's full report right here." He reached down beside his chair and lifted a manila folder from his bag. He set it on the table with one hand, flat, deliberate, and then slid it slowly across toward my father. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The folder moved those 2 feet across the tablecloth, and my father's face, that confident, satisfied face, drained of every drop of color in a matter of seconds. My mother made a sound that wasn't quite a word. My father stared at the folder without touching it. I stood in that doorway with tears I didn't understand yet, not tears of sadness, but something more like the tears that come when enormous pressure releases all at once. The room was completely silent. And then Marcus stood up from his chair, walked across to me, took my hand, and said quietly, "Let's go. We don't need to be here for this part." We left. And everything that came after, that is where the story truly begins. Chapter 2, The Evidence, the Truth, and the Man Who Chose Me. We sat in Marcus's car for a long time before either of us spoke. The engine wasn't running. The street outside was quiet. I had my hands folded in my lap and I was staring at the dashboard trying to process what had just happened inside that house, the house I had grown up in, the house where I had learned to walk and read and dream about a future, the house where my own father had just looked across a dinner table and called me a liar to the face of the man I loved. Marcus had one hand on the steering wheel even though we weren't moving. He does that when he's thinking, holds the wheel like an anchor. I had noticed it in the early months of our relationship, and it had always made me feel safe, that quiet steadiness in him. It made me feel safe now too, even in the middle of what felt like the ground dissolving beneath my feet. He spoke first. He told me everything. Not defensively, not as a confession of having gone behind my back, but carefully and honestly, the way Marcus has always communicated with me, like the truth is something he respects too much to dress up. He told me about the first call my mother had made to him privately, about 6 months earlier, where she had hinted vaguely at things in my past that I had kept hidden. He had not told me about it then because he hadn't wanted to upset me over what might have been nothing. But then a second contact came, this time a forwarded message to his email from an anonymous address, containing what appeared to be a screenshot of a medical record with my name on it. The record looked real at a glance, but something about the formatting was wrong, something a person without a careful eye might have missed. Marcus had a careful eye. He had shown it to a friend who worked in healthcare administration, who confirmed within 20 minutes that the document was fabricated. The font spacing in the header was from a template available on a free document editing website. The record number didn't follow any real hospital's formatting system. It was a fake. A carefully made fake, but a fake. That was when he hired the investigator. Not to dig into my life, he was clear about that, and I believed him completely because the report he described contained nothing about me except confirmation that I had no children, no hidden records, no sealed legal history of any kind. The report was entirely about the pattern of contact directed at Marcus, the calls, the messages, the attempts to reach members of his family with insinuations about my character. The investigator had documented 4 separate incidents over a 5-month period. The anonymous email had been traced through metadata to a device registered at my parents' address. My mother had called Marcus's older brother once, identifying herself and suggesting that Marcus was making a mistake that the whole family would regret. My father had spoken to Marcus's former colleague at a company event, again planting doubt, again using the word secret in connection with my name. All of it was in the folder. Dates, times, screenshots, call logs, a signed statement from Marcus's brother, a recorded voicemail my mother had left that she clearly did not realize had been saved. I listened to all of it sitting in that parked car, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not rage, not devastation, but a kind of grief so specific it had its own particular weight. It was the grief of having something confirmed that part of you had always known but refused to fully accept. I had spent my whole life managing my parents' version of me, shrinking when they needed me smaller, defending myself against accusations that came without evidence and dissolved before I could ever properly address them. I had always told myself that they loved me in their difficult way, that the control and the criticism came from some twisted root of care. Sitting in that car I understood, maybe for the first time with complete clarity, that what my parents had attempted that evening had nothing to do with love. You do not fabricate medical records against your own child. You do not coordinate a months-long campaign to destroy your daughter's engagement and call it love. What they had done was deliberate, organized, and cruel. And it had failed entirely because the man they had underestimated had quietly been 3 steps ahead of them the whole time. Marcus proposed to me again that night. Not because the first proposal needed replacing, He had proposed 8 months earlier in a way that was so perfectly him, so simple and genuine, that I had cried before he even finished the sentence. He proposed again because he wanted me to hear it outside of all the noise my parents had created. We were still in the parked car. He didn't have a ring because he hadn't planned it. He just turned to me and said that he had seen everything my family had done to undermine me, and he wanted me to know that none of it had moved him even slightly, that he knew exactly who I was, and that knowing who I was made him more certain than he had ever been. He asked me if I would still marry him. I said yes before he finished the question. We were married 11 days later. My parents were not there. That decision was not made in anger, it was made in clarity. Some doors, once you see what is truly behind them, are better kept closed. Marcus's family surrounded us that day with a warmth I had never experienced in my own home growing up, and I understood standing at that altar that family is not always the people who raised you. Sometimes family is the person who slides a folder across a table to protect your name without ever asking for credit. Sometimes family is the life you are brave enough to choose.